Patricia Gibson to move.
I stand today and feel very much the weight of despair, the burning sense of injustice and genuine bewilderment felt by the women who, by sheer bad luck, had the misfortune to be born in the 1950s and so inexplicably became fair game to be robbed, mugged, the victims of theft of the most cruel and callous kind. For some women, this theft can be up to £40,000 in lost pension. I would also like to point out, Mr Chair, that a large number of MPs who support the Waspi women in their quest for justice, sent me messages asking me to convey their support despite their absence. Too many to mention, but many of my colleagues across the House dearly wanted to speak in this debate, but were unable to attend. In my lifetime, Mr Chair, this could be the most unjust government policy since the poll tax, affecting 3.8 million women and 4,800 women in my constituency of North Ayrshire and Arran. The acceleration of the timetable set out in the 1995 Pensions Act meant these women faced changes to pension age abruptly, with little or no time to adapt and prepare. These women have had their pensions stolen from them. It is as simple as that. They paid into their pensions through a lifetime of work, raising their families and often acting as carers for other members of their families, doing all the right things, only to discover when it came time for them to be paid out, they were told the rules of the game had changed. Not only that, no one had thought to tell them that the rules of the game had changed, but that was just bad luck. In addition, lower wages and broken employment periods mean that many of these women do not have a full national insurance record, so they receive lower state pensions than men anyway. Indeed, the average woman receives around 82% of what a man does in his state pension. They also have a fraction of the savings of men. So we know that equalisation is not just about the age at which you reach retirement. With no time to make alternative plans, many of these women are suffering, and many are now living in poverty as a direct result of this political choice not to give these women their proper due. Only last week, Philip Olsen, the UN Special Rapporteur on extreme poverty and human rights, he concluded that after decades of decline, we are now witnessing a rise in pensioner poverty, with the figure rising in recent years by £300,000. And he went on to say, and I quote, "A group of women born in the 1950s have been particularly impacted by an abrupt and poorly phased change in the state pension age from 60 to 66. The impact of the changes to pensionable age is such as to severely penalise those who happen to be on the cusp of retirement." I'll just finish this quotation from the rapporteur. "The impact of these changes to pensionable age is such as to severely penalise those who happen to be on the cusp of retirement and who had well-founded expectations of entering the next phase of their lives, rather than being plunged back into a workforce for which many of them are ill-prepared and to which they could not reasonably have been expected to adjust to with no notice." And I would be keen to hear the Minister's response to the rapporteur's words there. And if he wishes to intervene now to rebut that point, I would be delighted to give way. But in the absence of the Minister seeking me to give way, I'll take the intervention of this gentleman.
Jim Cunningham.
I don't know about that. Anyway, can I congratulate the Honourable Lady in securing this debate? It's a timely debate. We've had many debates on this, and the government doesn't seem to get the message. But if you look at from the start of the recession until now, it's women that's actually carried the brunt of this recession. It's no net in tax adjustments. The government saved something like about 14 billion at the expense of women. If you look at what they've been saving now as a result of not doing the right thing by these women, it probably runs into billions, and a fraction of those billions could actually take care of that problem.
The honourable gentleman makes his point very well. In fact, it was recently said to me that it was interesting that the government had chosen to pick a fight with women of a certain age and a policy which would impact women of most harsh of a particular lower income bracket level who feel the most pain in this policy, and whether they had been considered or not an easy target. Perhaps the Minister has his views on that. I have participated in every single debate on Waspi women since I was elected, and I repeatedly hear from whoever is responding for the government, and there have been a variety of ministers who have done so, that this is about us all living longer. But this debate is not about life expectancy, although we know that life expectancy has stalled. It's about women who had their pension age changed with little or no notice, and this has caused, as a direct result, considerable hardship. I will indeed.
Very grateful indeed to Mon O'Flynn for giving way, and she has been an absolute consistent campaigner on this, and at times when there have been so many debates, it's heartening to see her pressing this issue so often. But she's absolutely right to press the point of life expectancy, because any time previously when we've had a debate on this issue, the Pensions Minister has been unable to tell me what the life expectancy in my constituency is. We know that newspapers like The Guardian like to talk about the life expectancy in Glasgow East, so I'm very surprised that the Minister doesn't know that life expectancy isn't that high, and these changes really impact people in my constituency.
I suspect the Minister knows fine well what the age expectancy in Glasgow East and in various parts of the UK are, but I know that that might make uncomfortable reading when you're trying to impose a policy of one-size-fits-all and stealing people of their pensions. Many of the women in Glasgow East, in your constituency and indeed in my own, will die before they're of age to collect. The Institute of Fiscal Studies has pointed out that more than 1 in 5 women, in fact 21.2% of women in the Waspi group affected by recent increases in state pension age, were in poverty, and this is up 6.4 percentage points on the situation pre-reform. Meanwhile, analysis for the longitudinal studies found that the poorest pensioners are the least able to work into their later years. It concluded that men and women, both men and women who had been poor during their working lives, were the most likely to leave the job market between the ages of 50 and 55, with poor health being the key driver. But with striking inequalities in life expectancy and health expectancy, there are great worries that this policy hits hardest the poorest and most vulnerable. And of course, this has been borne out by analysis by the Institute of Fiscal Studies. It shows that a third of single women aged between 60 and 63 were in poverty after housing costs. This is up 13.5 percentage points since before the reforms. Similarly, nearly 4 out of 10 people renting their homes, up from around a quarter, are in poverty. The IFS also found that 1.1 million women saw their individual incomes fall by an average of £50 per week, and increased income from earnings is simply not enough to offset the loss of pensions. TUC analysis shows that 500,000 workers who are within 5 years of state pension age have had to leave the workplace for medical reasons, and those who have worked in the lowest paid jobs are twice as likely to stop working before retirement age due to sickness and disability than managers or professionals. In just a moment, in the absence of labour market reforms, it is hard to see how raising the state pension age will allow this group to continue working. Rather, it will mean greater reliance on working age benefits, something that the government says it wishes to avoid. It also makes it even more indefensible that the government decided, and this point is key, and I really hope the Minister is listening, because I would really like him to address it when he sums up. The government decided to implement the recommendation of the Cridland Review, which recommended accelerating the rise in pension age to 68. Yet the government, while accepting those recommendations, chose to ignore the welfare reforms that John Cridland said were essential if you were going to accelerate the state pension age, because you had to cushion the impact of these changes. And I would like the Government Minister to comment on why the impact of these changes have not been cushioned, as Cridland suggested they should be. You can't pick the bits of a review you like. You implement it all, or you implement none of it. Just because the government has not listened, that does not mean that these women are not suffering. It does not mean that many of them have been left destitute. And it might be worth noting that because these women, organised, persistent and dignified as they have been, because they are just ordinary women, it might be easier for the government to ignore them than, say, rich, powerful men? Well, the government may think that, but the reality doesn't bear this out. These women have been robbed, they have been betrayed, they have been misrepresented, they have been mistreated, and they will not go away. And I repeat a question I have asked the government many, many times. Where on earth do they expect these women to go?
Bob Seeley.
My honourable friend for giving way, and it is certainly true that in the 10,000 or so Waspi women in my constituency of the Isle of Wight are not natural protesters. They don't wave a placard at the first opportunity. And in fact, they're very much people who played a very positive role in our communities throughout the years, and they are to be found in the Women's Institute, Making Jam, and in many other voluntary groups. And I think it is deeply disappointing that any government seems to treat them in such a disrespectful way. And it would be nice, considering there is more money in our budget, announced by the Chancellor recently, if some recognition could have been given to Waspi women in that budget. Thank you.
Patricia Gibson.
I agree with everything the honourable gentleman has just said, and I think one of the most frustrating things that Waspi women have found in their quest for justice isn't that they're not getting what they're asking for, bad as that is. It's the wall of silence with which they are being met as though they don't exist, and that is not acceptable. I'll just make a wee bit of progress if the honourable gentleman... Okay.
There have been too many occasions when pensions ministers have said how many years women will get the pension once they get it. Can we make it plain to them, through the Honourable Lady, that the question is what happens in the years before they get the state pension?
Patricia Gibson.
Well, the SNP commissioned independent research into how this could be resolved. The government rejected that research. It's also rejected, as far as I can see, every other potential solution that's been put forward by every other quarter. And I would like the Minister to be able to tell us how he thinks this matter can be progressed, because doing nothing is not a sustainable option, and it's certainly not a sustainable option for the Waspi women. I will make some progress. The Waspi women's situation is doubly unjust because it is this particular group of women who have faced pay discrimination in their working lives. All their working lives, they have been paid less, acknowledged less, valued less, and now, when they should be enjoying retirement, they are expected to sit quietly and simply accept the loss of their well-deserved and much-needed state pension. This is not pin money. This is money to pay the rent, buy food, do the shopping, pay the bills. How is this decent by any measure? It's an absolute disgrace. And the UK government, the Minister today, really must have a brass neck if he thinks that he can talk his way out of this. The UK government's lack of engagement on this issue has been breathtaking in its arrogance. These women know that many of their number of those hardest hit have been driven to self-harm and suicide. The fact is that research has been undertaken by the charity Silence of Suicide for the Back to 60 campaign group. And that research shows that almost half of the 873 respondents in their research have self-harmed because of the stress and hardship caused by this pension reform. 46% also reported having had suicidal thoughts as a direct result of this pension reform. And 70 women said that they had attempted to take their own lives. And all the while, the UK government wrings its hands and stutters about people living longer. Such is the government's intransigence that these women are now forced to go to court. Back to 60 has launched a judicial review seeking to force the government to reverse this decision. And the argument will be made that the pension policy implemented by successive governments is a gross injustice and is in fact discriminatory, even though the delay in paying out these pensions is done in the name of equality. Now, there's a wee irony for you. According to Michael Mansfield, QC, and law professor Jackie Jones, who has argued that the UK is in breach of its international treaty obligations. The demand for what is right, the demand for fair transitional arrangements for these women will not be silenced. The former Pensions Minister, Stephen Webb, inconveniently for the government, conceded that not enough had been done to inform and prepare these women for these changes. And the Work and Pension Select Committee concluded that more could and should have been done to communicate these changes. It seems a mess was made of the acceleration of these changes in the 2011 Pensions Act, but the only people to pay the price of this mess are the women involved. And I'll give way to my honourable friend.
Stevens.
Thank you, Mr Bourne, and I thank my honourable friend for giving way. There are many women watching this debate, including the Blackfriars pub in Glasgow, where many of my constituents are watching this debate and hearing an excellent speech from my honourable friend. But in terms of the mystical letters that were supposed to have sent out to so many women, does she agree with me that they are so elusive that you had a better chance of finding a golden ticket in a Wonka bar than you would have get a letter from the Department of Work and Pensions telling them that their pensions were changing?
Producer Gibson.
Indeed. And I'm sure the Waspi women are gratified to hear the level of support, Mr Chair, in this room for their cause and their quest for justice. But I'll just... Before the Minister does, I would like to, because I know that he's going to, I would like to turn to the well-worn phrases and half-hearted justifications which may well form part of his response in this debate today. Just to be clear, this debate is not about at what age people should retire. This debate is not about how we're all living longer. It is about successive UK governments not communicating significant changes in women's pension age to them, and about the political choice not to address this in order to save money. This debate is about how expendable women born in the 1950s are to this government. The fact is that pension equalisation was not supposed to occur until, it wasn't supposed to begin until 2020, as set out in the 1995 Pensions Act. But this was accelerated in 2011 with no communication or care for the effect it would have on the women affected, with the added bonus of saving the Treasury, and I'm sure it was accidental, saving the Treasury about £5 billion a year by equalising state pension to 65 years. But now, Mr Chair, we have an interesting development. We have Baroness Altman, formerly a great champion of older people who was neutralised in this debate by being elevated to the Lords and given a pensions portfolio as a minister. She has told us that she was informed that the 1950s women would go away sooner or later.
Shocking.
Well, guess what?
Shocking.
They are still here. And they are watching in the chamber and they are watching in the towns and villages across the UK, willing this cruel and heartless government to listen and do the right thing. And in a final thought, we continue to hear from this government that 1.1, and I'm sure the Minister was going to mention it, £1.1 billion of concessions have already been made. This is trotted out as though the government has targeted money at the women affected, but this is simply disingenuous at best. The facts are that this £1.1 billion did not go solely to women, and these concessions were limited to 500,000 men and women who were born within a short time frame between January and October 1954. The concession took the form of limiting the delay with the change in annually managed expenditure, estimated at £1.1 billion. So just to be clear, this £1.1 billion of cash wasn't doled out to people in envelopes. In fact, it was not a monetary exchange for those involved. Today, I and my party and parties across the chamber stand beside these Waspi women who have been the victims of a great injustice. And I, as I said earlier in my speech, I think it is not any greater an injustice than the poll tax was. And we will continue to stand beside them. This issue has not been debated in the Commons for over 9 months, and I'm sure the government thought the storm had passed. But it hasn't passed. It will not pass, as these women are engulfed by this storm. Every single day they have to manage without their pensions. Up and down all parts of the UK, Waspi women are watching this debate both inside and outside this chamber, including Cunningham Waspi, to whom I pay tribute, as well as all the Waspi women who are waiting for justice, hoping against hope that this heartless government will finally hear their pleas for what is rightfully theirs to be restored to them. So I'm just about to wrap up, but I want to say to the Minister, in the name of all that is just, in the name of all that is right, I urge the Minister to go back from this debate today and tell his government that this must not stand. The Waspi women need and deserve their pensions. Let's get this sorted, let's undo this damage once and for all, and let's do it now.
Yes.